Right, we'll chat to from one Dr. Imtiaz Suleiman. We'll chat to Imtiaz Suleiman. Don't get confused. That comes up later around issues of finance and investments, and also chatting to. In fact, we're going to talk about the Mayfair Mosque, about the history of the Mayfair Mosque. Fascinating mosque with a fascinating story, and we'll talk about that coming up before we wrap up the show, as well as speaking to Catherine Constantinidis about how she, in fact, champions South Africa. Now, however, let's talk elections in France. You know, we teased the story along about a week back. That election, people voted yesterday. What's come out of it? Rim Sarah Alouane, as always, good chatting to you, and salaam alaikum. Thanks for joining me.
Alaikum salam. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Now, when we spoke the other day, I mean, you sort of gave comparisons about the difficulties that the public would have choosing from one and the other. What's come out of that election?
Well, it was quite tough. It was a rough night, to be honest. So Emmanuel Macron indeed won the election. But if it is a huge relief, there is nothing really to celebrate about it. This campaign was a disaster. And I would even go further and say that the far right may not have won the election per se, but they definitely have won the battle of ideas. Their ideas, unfortunately, that has been so normalized that for now they are here to stay. And it's quite worrying because their scores are increasing presidential election after presidential election. This time, 41.2% voters or French voters voted for the agenda of Marine Le Pen. It is huge.
Okay, so let me get that right. Did you say 41% of voters voted for Marine Le Pen? 41%?
Yes, according to the latest numbers I saw, 41.2 precisely.
Okay, so that means the balance on this runoff of like 69 or 59% voted for the incumbent leader, right?
Yes, 58.8 to be exact.
Okay. So you're suggesting, therefore, that whereas Emmanuel Macron, would retain power, in fact, it does reflect a massive shift to the right, and increasingly so for France.
Absolutely. And I think we discussed that the last time I was on your show. Even Macron's administration took that hard right turn, right? But clearly, we have a very divided society. Macron, let's put it bluntly, Macron was re-elected with the votes of A, the people he targeted with his policies, and B, the people of especially maybe the far left, as those who didn't know, to avoid to vote for Marine Le Pen. So in the end, many voters voted against Marine Le Pen, but not necessarily for Emmanuel Macron's agenda.
So help us understand that, because look, in South Africa, for example, we have an election, and the party that gets 50% on that first election wins the election. If they don't, if they get 40%, there's a coalition of sorts. So we don't have election runoffs, right? France has runoffs, and what does that mean? Just explain that, and therefore it does give people an opportunity for a second vote and a third vote, which we certainly don't have in South Africa.
So the presidential election works like this. So you need to have the absolute majority to be able to be elected at the first round, which honestly has never happened during the Fifth Republic. So the republic we are currently in. So if the two first get the more votes, there is a runoff, so a second round, and the person who obtained the majority of votes win the election. But I would go a little bit further and say that somehow we kind of sort of have a third round, in the sense that legislative elections are coming in June, meaning that to be able to govern, Macron will have to have the majority at the National Assembly. Otherwise, he won't be able to push his agenda forward. So let's say it's not completely over, and I'm really curious as to what is going to happen, because I suspect, again, I might be wrong, those are predictions. I suspect that it won't be that easy for Macron and his party to get the majority of votes, and there might be at some point a coalition that will have to be formed, or even a cohabitation when the president and the prime minister might be of different political colors. So wait and see.
Okay. Now, when we've spoken of particular interest to our audience, right, is we have a large Muslim audience, right, and therefore the where did the issue of Muslims and immigrants fit into this election battle?
Well, French Muslims, as well as vulnerable communities, but let's focus on French Muslims since it's your question. They have been vilified for years, way before Macron. Okay, you can date back since in the 1980s, really, but they have been vilified, accused of things they are not, guilty of, and many legislation passed to target their religious freedom rights, to try to tame them, to try to, legislation violating basic civil liberties on the ground of security, for example. And the whole presidential campaign was really based on anti-Muslim bigotry, especially with Marine Le Pen, as well as Éric Zemmour, her far-right opponents. So it's an obsession, really. And the irony of fate is that in the end, to be able to win, Macron had to reach out this part of the population that his administration targeted, especially 3 of his ministers. And he had to reach them out. And Muslims in the end had to choose between a politician that has not been really kind and thoughtful towards them, to put it mildly, and another one who wants them out of the country. And unfortunately, the choice is quite hard, but when you have no choice, you vote for the person who is the less of the two evils.
Yeah, strange debate, less of two evils. Were they, how big is the Muslim population of France, and therefore naturally, how big is the electorate of Muslims? And the last one, you can answer this in one go. What ability, therefore, has the Muslim population have, or does it have, to influence French politics to ensure that they have gains based upon who they vote for?
So first of all, I need to make some legal explanation to your audience. So in France, statistics based on religion religion, ethnicity, and race are prohibited. So the numbers I'm going to give you are estimates. We estimate that in France, the Muslim population comprises around 8% of the population. So it's not that big, right? And as to the votes, well, I don't exactly believe in a so-called Muslim vote, really. I think Muslims, first, are not a monolith. There are plenty of different kind of Muslims, from the lower class, the middle class, and even some in minority, but in the upper middle class or even the upper class. More rare, but it does exist. So I think there is a vote more grounded on social and economic issues. And unfortunately, there is a part of the Muslim population who really lives in dire conditions, right? And I think the problem maybe we have in France is clearly a lack of organization, which is ironically a very French issue, I think, as to the more Muslims, and especially the new generations, right? So the youth, so we are talking about the second or third generation, the more they are trying to organize, the more public authorities see that as a threat and try to control that. So it's quite tough, but I would end that on a kind of hopeful note. Things are changing. Slowly but surely. This generation of Muslims are finding their voice through social media, foreign media reaching out to them. And it is changing, but I always say it would get worse before it get better. in my
And
opinion.
perhaps the last thing, and it's personal to you and in general. I mean, I take it that many of the the French Muslim population are either from North Africa, the Maghreb
Mhm,
regions, or from West Africa, French speaking in most
mhm.
cases, right? Would that apply to someone like yourself as well? And therefore, uh, do they now regard do they regard themselves um, as French in terms of identity, or do they say we are French Moroccan, French Algerian, French
Mhm.
Malian, and so on and so on.
It's a very interesting question. To respond on a personal level, since you asked, I consider myself as a Mediterranean. I'm French of Algerian background, but I was born
Okay.
and raised here. France is my country. Let me put it that way through a metaphor. For me, so I'm of Algerian background. So the roots for me is Algeria. The trunk of the tree is France, and the leaves is what make me me. I'm a mix of both in, the best of both countries, and that's who I am. And it's very interesting to see that the more French Muslims are saying we are French, of XYZ background, but we are French, the more it is perceived as a threat to the statu quo, to the French demographics, or at least what the French demographics should be in certain very close-minded minds of people, right? Close-minded people, and I think this generation of French perceive this as fully French without denying the background. But the more they are doing that, the more it's never enough. You're not completely integrated because of your religion, your origin,
Mm.
your ethnicity. And it's draining. It's draining. You always have to prove yourself. And I think that's what some people decide also to leave the country. It's not sustainable.
Another conversation for another time. Well, I tell you
Mhm.
what, I love that the metaphor of the tree, and in fact, Rim, I could probably say that I would answer the same way that you would for myself in South Africa, and I think for many other people that we are fiercely and proudly rooted to our country, but the heritage comes from other parts of the world. So, but certainly
Absolutely.
get your point. Thank you for your time as always. Most appreciated. Feel free, by the way, to tweet, because you're on Twitter, to tweet some of the additional comments you may wish to add, and you can certainly tag me, Ashraf Garda, as well as Salam Media. Great chatting to you.
Absolutely. I will do that. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and enjoy the last days of Ramadan.
Inshallah, and to you as well. Thank
Enjoy.
you.
Thank
Rim
you.
Sarah Alouane, very, very fascinating in about the French politics, but also their own heritage about the French. What 6 to 8% of the the population of France are Muslim. That's how large. In fact, it's probably the largest, they say, in the world, in Europe rather. Okay, we're going to get to Santiago Capital and some important market news in a moment.